Youth Sports Network presents TouchDown Ontario with Devin Gilmore McNeil.
Welcome back to the Fall Football Roundup, Episode 6 here with TYSN presented by Football Ontario. Back here with my staple panel of guests, Jesse Card, Russell Silverson. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. A great weekend of football, a great weekend of honoring football in Ottawa and some of the events we had to honor Big Q in Canada and Bell on Friday night, and also just some really good football action. I seen you were able to get out to some of those games on Friday. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, well,
from
we
those
talked
events?
about it last week on the podcast when you had me. The terrible tragedy that happened here last Sunday night, and unfortunately the loss of a young life that was connected to the football community in Big Q, as we referred to him. What I saw on Friday night was the beginning of a weekend where he was honored. And this wasn't just Canada Knights where he played growing up, or the Cumberland team that he played in the summertime with the OFFL. This was kind of across the city. We saw teams setting up donation boxes at the gate, asking for and soliciting donations to help pay for the family's expenses that they're going to have to undertake to put this young man to rest. And they also organized moments of silence. So I was out in Quinns Point. I went out there that evening to take in the Bell Warriors versus Orleans games at the U14, U16 level. And Tracy is kind of an amazing lady that has been helping the Bell Warriors for many years now. She's essentially, as I would put in the words of President of Bell Warriors, Paul Stewart, indispensable, and has kept that organization going over the last few years, and relieving Paul of some of the kind of tasks that a president is responsible for. So keeping that organization going, and she organized a moment of silence where she stood at the 50, and you just saw kind of the respect from everyone there. Whether they were an Orleans parent or player or coach, we all understand the gravity of this. And it was really nice to see. And from what I saw in Tracy's post on Facebook, they were able to raise, $1,500 or something to go towards those expenses. So I think that is unbelievable. I was also able, after the U16 first half, to race back to Canada to catch the Kemptville U16 Canada game. And same thing. They had the same organization of a moment of silence there for Quinton, and then also taking in donations as well. And I think throughout the weekend across the city, it was quite successful fundraiser for the family. So that's good.
Yeah, I think we also talked about it, guys, ad nauseum last week. It's just a great rallying cry by the community, and you can really see how much of a family that NCAFA is, and that how much of a family that the sport of football is, right, around the province, around the country, around the world. So it was really nice to see that and take that in. I seen some pictures that, the great Wanda Keenan was able to capture. There's one of a Canada player holding his helmet to the sky. With LLQ, which I've seen, that's the hashtag going around right now. I think that's Long Live Quinton, and he was wearing that as armband. It was such a great moment to take in, and obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with his family, but the NCAFA community rallying together and showing everybody how much of a family it is. I think it's really awesome to see around the community. But Russell, we'll go to you. How are you feeling after this weekend? I know we're going to touch on some Bantam things a little bit later. But what was your takeaways from the Bantam division, at a quick glance this past weekend?
It was a lot of blowouts. Cumberland, well, not Cumberland. Myers, not even Myers. South Ottawa with a 72-0 blowout as they come in to play Myers this weekend. So that is my main storyline for this week. It would be the Myers taking on South Ottawa. It is their first game of 2 of their big tests to end out the season. And before I go any farther, I would just like to mention my biggest takeaway from this weekend would have to be the support that Quinton received and all the money raised. That is my big takeaway. Just the support of the NCAFA community coming together to raise all that money for his family and everything. I thought it was beautiful to see. And as everyone might know by now, not being from here, seeing kind of like from an outside view, the way this community is able to come together is just unbelievable. So I just wanted to say that. But yeah, moving on to this week, Myers taking on South Ottawa. It's going to be a doozy of a match. Friday night lights game up in Quinns Point Field, 8:30. These are some darn good football teams, gentlemen. South Ottawa, their only loss of the season, come against the Raiders. Myers still undefeated, have the most wins in the league, 6-0. Very similar in offensively, defensively. I'd say South Ottawa has a bit of an edge in the I'd say offensive and defensive categories, not by a large margin, but they definitely do. I believe Myers is averaging. They're giving up 10.67 points per game, whereas South Ottawa was only giving up 4.6, so close in defense. Offensively, Myers is scoring 38 points per game, and then South Ottawa is scoring 45 points per game. So it's really close. But what I will say, too, is I think outside of South Ottawa playing the Raiders, Myers has had a couple more tougher matchups. They just played Cornwall last weekend. They won by 1 score. You probably big fan of that, Devin. Wasn't a blowout. So I think it's going to be a close matchup. I think it's going to be a great matchup. I'm expecting a close game. I could really see it going any way, but I gotta have to ride the Myers bandwagon here, and I'm hoping for a big Myers win on Friday night.
Well, and based on social media, guys, like I've seen the kicker for Myers Bantam be able to hit from like 40 yards. So when we talk about a tight defensive battle, both teams with offensive firepower, and if it does come down to a close kind of last minute possession, Myers can put it away with a kick. So that's something to maybe look for too. But I'm really excited. I'm going to try to make that game. I'm sure a lot of people in the city watching this show are keeping their eyes on that. Probably see them. What you said, Friday night, Russ?
Friday night, 8:30, yeah, at Quinns Point Field. Also, just to talk about the kicker, he's actually also the running back. I interviewed him when I went to go watch them play against the Bell Warriors. His name is Daniele Nicastro. Yeah, great kid, great athlete, strong runs, and he can kick too. That's the first thing I noticed. I was like, oh, running back and kicker. That's a dual threat, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting whenever you see at this level, whenever you have that special weapon kicker that can hit from 40 plus, it is really an added bonus to your team because not a lot of teams have that luxury. So, you know, talking to Wanda Jess, who was at that Myers and Cornwall game, and Russ, she said the kicker was the reason why they won that game. You know, it was a field position game, and I think she said that he hit like 4 or 5 field goals from, you know, a decent margin away. So having that secret weapon in your back pocket when you get, you know, into the red zone, saying, hey, like, you know, we probably have 3 points here. Let's go try and punch this in because our kicker's going to boom one from 40 plus anyways, right?
Yep.
So that's an added luxury to your team, and I think that's an area of football teams at this level that might be overlooked is having that really good special teams unit, you know, not giving up the big plays on kickoffs. You know, how many times have we seen kickoffs just, you know, take the life out of a team, right? The kickoff returns, yep. Boom, touchdown, 90 yards down the field, it's over, right?
And let's be honest, that's what it takes to win like an A Cup or even a B Cup. Like it's limiting those mistakes. I know this is kind of cliche, right? Like sports analysis talk, but at that level, right, when you get into a championship game, these are the best teams, and it's those that can keep the ball, you know, keep possession, not make those mistakes on giving up huge plays, like you said, Devin, on special teams. You know, field position is actually important in these championship playoff games. And like you said, if you've got a kicker and he's been doing it all year for you, you're not afraid to put him out there and rely on points coming from that individual. So this is going to be exciting, but I think you're right. That's a storyline to look at with Myers, is their ability and in the kicking game.
Yeah, and let's dive in a little bit deeper here into that matchup because it was easily the game of the week, you know, especially at the older divisions, Pee Wee and Bantam. Cornwall versus Myers. So this rivalry has really turned into something. Obviously, they play each other in the summer. So there's that three-headed monster in the NCAFA that also plays against each other in the summer, which is the Wildcats, Cumberland, and Myers. And to see this rivalry kind of, you know, spill over into the fall, and that's where the rivalry really begins anyways, is NCAFA. I really love it. And I know at Joe St. Denis here in Cornwall, there's a lot of fans that come out to watch these games here at Joe St. Denis, and having that game happen like in Cornwall, I think that was awesome. You know, Cornwall's really I think, struggled this year at the bantam division because they're so young, and a lot of their highly touted players and a lot of the players that they count on are just coming up from Pee Wee, which you don't really see a lot, right? You don't see those young Pee Wee players come up and immediately make an impact, but Cornwall's counting on a lot of those players to make an impact. And I think those close score games, they haven't been able to get over the hump yet. And you see the experience on Myers, like Russell said, Daniel Nicastro, who's running back and also with the big leg. And then they have Eric Shillington, who did a lot in the summer for the OSFL Riders. But then you look at the Cornwall team, and they're all 1.5 to 2 years younger than these players, right? Like Connor Hamlin and Bryce Camplin, those are like their main offensive players. So it might take a little bit while for them to catch their groove. But I'd say Cornwall's a team to watch out for that B Cup, right, Jess? Because I think the four top teams make the A Cup bracket, and then the middle ones battle it out for the B Cup, if I'm correct on that. So I kind of like looking forward and thinking probably Canada Cornwall for that B Cup, which we love the B Cups. Like for me, never played in an A Cup, so B Cup is my A Cup. So I like seeing those matchups at B Cup. So that was a really great matchup. And then Russell said, let's break down this matchup this weekend, because this might be the best bantam game we have all year in the Mustangs battling the Riders, Russell. So a couple of players I want to shout out for the Mustangs. We haven't necessarily talked about their actual players a lot on this podcast, but Fogel Filani, who is their do-it-all running back, receiver, whatever you want to call him, get the ball into his hands and get out of the way. That's what I like to call him. He is electric. The Myers is going to have their hands full, slowing him down absolutely. And then we just seen yesterday, Offensive Player of the Week and Defensive Player of the Week for the Mustangs at bantam after their huge win. Russell, you mentioned it at the top over the Giants. Ben Cardish is their quarterback. Him and Fogel Filani on the offensive side have been unstoppable to start the season. Only loss coming against the Raiders, and they look unstoppable as well. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, they have Yasir Hussein, who, Jesse, I don't know if you remember this, when we were covering the OSFL championships, I believe he had 2 interceptions for the Panthers at the U16 level against Burlington.
That's right.
A lot of talent on both sides of the ball here. Mustangs, and they're playing at a neutral site, which we haven't mentioned. Obviously, they're playing at Quinns Point. That's neither of their team's home field. So I really like that element of meeting up for this neutral site game in Week 7, and I'm excited for it. Like, what are your guys' thoughts heading into this huge Friday night game?
Well, we talked about it just before we got on the call. Maybe it's a scheduling thing, but I suspect maybe there's some lobbying going on to say this is the biggest game, kind of getting into the meat of the season. The weather's starting to change. It's raining here in Ottawa today. So do we want to play that thing at Caladar on the grass fields? No. We want to move to turf and have as much of as a fair, neutral, good conditioned field as possible so that both teams can perform at their optimal standards.
Yeah, and I also think NCAFA's done a really good job at scheduling this year, where you have 5 or 6 games usually on Friday nights, and that really gets your weekend started for the people that might have plans on the weekend. A Friday night football, and there's been some incredible games, just some of the games that you've been at and covering, like that Bel Air versus Canada varsity game. I mean, that's one of the best games of the year in football. Period.
I think that was the best one so far in the league, in the city.
Yeah.
You're right. And shout out to Chris Leonard, who's taken over that role this year. Doing a phenomenal job. Obviously, Chris Leonard, we've had him on the podcast in the past. He's helping out at Cornwall. He's been a longtime coach there. He's coached in Barrhaven when they were the Redskins before the Eagles transition. He started with Bell Warriors. Chris knows the league intimately. He cares about the league. When it comes to scheduling and what you're talking about, that we're seeing that passion come through in terms of really thinking this thing through and setting up some exciting Friday nights to start the weekends.
Yeah, guys, let's put a cap on the Bantam division.
Well, I will just say I did watch the Bell Warriors defeat the Orleans Bengals at the U16 level. That was their first win on the season, so I think the team was pretty psyched about that to finally have some success. And I can tell you, from what I saw, I know that they were a winless team going into the game and playing another team that is struggling a little bit on the win column in Orleans. However, there were some athletes on both sides of the ball, so that's the kind of thing to keep in mind. Of course, what's going to get the most oxygen is the teams that are winning, and that's what's fun to talk about. but there are so many good football players in Ottawa on all these teams, even the winless teams at Bantam and Pee Wee, that we need to learn more about and track and talk to the coaches, because these players have the capability of going on to do great things and play in the summer in the OSFL, maybe be on championship level teams, and provided that they stay on the right track, we might be seeing them at the next levels too. So just some amazing talent. A couple of players, running back for Bell Warriors, stuck out in my mind. I didn't get a chance to stick around and chat with him and get his name, but I'm aware of him now, and it's going to be fun kind of watching all these teams for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, Jess, to put a cap on, I wanted to look at our power rankings that just came out yesterday, and one of the teams I actually did want to talk about was that Bell Warriors team. We've had them high in our power rankings despite being winless all season, because they've had probably the hardest schedule in the league to open the season. I mean, they've played their first 5 weeks, they've played the top 5 teams. So, that's a tough stretch for you to just go into, and they've battled in those games. So them winning their first game and winning it pretty handily, that really does boost a spark into your ball club, right? I mean, it really gets you going. It doesn't matter how tight these games are. You need a win on the column, right? You need a win in the win column, and if you don't get that, you're not going to feel any confidence. But to wrap up the Bantam division, Russell, I wanted to throw this to you. TYSN's Bantam power rankings came out yesterday. I'm going to rattle off the top 6, and you tell me if there's any discrepancies in what you think, all right?
Okay.
Number
I'm
1,
ready.
Cumberland Panthers, okay? I'll run through them all, and then you can give me, okay? 1, Cumberland Panthers, all right?
Yep.
2, Gloucester South Raiders, okay?
Okay.
3, Myers Riders.
All right.
4, South Ottawa Mustangs.
All right.
5, Cornwall Wildcats. And 6, Canada Knights. With those top 6 teams, right? Because all those teams have 3 or plus wins. That's why I wanted to group them in together. They all have 3 or plus wins. Who do you think can make the biggest jump there? And which one do you disagree with the most? And I have a feeling I know which one you're going to say, but give me your thoughts on that.
Well, okay. I think the biggest discrepancy is having the Knights at the bottom. I think they're a little bit underrated. Like I said, we mentioned that. I did kind of maybe go a little bash them last week and saying they didn't win against the Mustangs. They didn't win against the Riders, but they still haven't even allowed, I think they've only allowed 47 points this season. They've only allowed 67 points this season. And they have 147 points for. They're one of the only teams left who have yet to give up 100 points on the season. Those teams are literally all the teams that are ahead of them, excluding the Wildcats in your power rankings. They're 3-2 right now. I think they, with the rest of their schedule, the way it's looking out, they could win their next 2 games. They're 5-2. So I'm going to probably take them over the Wildcats in this one. That's probably the one I disagree with the most.
3-2.
And,
3-2.
3-2.
Yeah, that's right.
What was your second question?
I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on who you think could make a push towards that top level, maybe a lower team, or who do you think maybe doesn't belong at that top level and maybe could fall down as the season goes on here? Because this Friday we're going to learn a lot, right? We're going to learn a lot in this Bantam division. Yes. Like the Mustangs, Riders playing each other. We've said ad nauseum all year we need to see Myers play one of these top 4 teams. Obviously, they've beaten Canada and they've beaten Cornwall in one score, really, really close games. Let's see how they fare against one of those top, what I like to say, East teams in the Mustangs, Cumberland, or the Raiders. Yeah.
In terms of which teams could rise and fall, I think very easily the Myers could fall because look at their last 2 games, right? 4-1 Mustangs, 5-0 Raiders to end the season, right? This is going to be 2 tough matchups heading right into the playoffs. This is the start of their playoffs. These are going to probably be tough, rowdy playoff type matchups, and we're going to see if they're fit for it. So if they drop the next 2 games, they're going to go down in my personal rankings of these teams, right?
Russ, you've been on them all season, buddy.
Exactly. Another team too that I think not a lot of people are maybe mentioning. I also think the Panthers could come down in my rankings too. They haven't played a lot of high-end teams. They haven't played the Raiders, the Riders, Mustangs. I don't even think they played the Canada Knights. They played mostly teams without wins or with only 1 wins and big points for, points against differentials. So I'm kind of wondering if they get maybe a bit of a shock going to the playoffs, playing like a really tough team. Like, whoa, like we didn't expect this. We've been coasting through the season. So that's another team I think could come down.
And Russ, we talked about that for the last 2 weeks, right? We said this Cumberland team, their schedule is kind of light. And they've had a few issues with scheduling and forfeitures that they've had to deal with. What does that do in the locker room to these kids that haven't played? They're practicing. They're starting to maybe get a little bit too comfortable, as you said. So I definitely would keep my eyes on this Cumberland team towards the end of the season. It's going to be challenging for them to be at kind of the peaking point when they need to be come playoffs. So the other team that I think I would, we haven't seen in person a lot is the Raiders. Like, obviously, we can see the results, but I have a little bit of an asterisk question mark on the Raiders. I just feel maybe this is just intuition or but I think that team also, we'll see how they fare for the rest of the season. They're playing Kempville this weekend, so I don't think we're going to get anything, anything new and gather anything from this team this weekend, but the following weeks and into the playoffs, we'll see how they either rise or fall.
Yes. Yeah, so with the Raiders, what I will say, why I feel probably more confident about them than almost any other team in the division, is they've had those tests, right? They've beaten the Mustangs 10-8, and they've also Russell, you said this a couple weeks ago, and I think this is the perfect way to put it. They can go in that track meet game and put up 50 to a team's 40 or whatever, but they can also play in that tight, really competitive game, physical game. I remember playing the Raiders when I was young at the Bantam division, and you were leaving that game with some bumps and bruises for sure. And I think they could play that style as well. Another thing with the Raiders, we've seen some highlights with them with some of Wanda's footage. I believe their quarterback is U14 AAA OSFL Provincial All-Star Andrew Colson, who won it with Cumberland, who made it an all-star team with Cumberland, who didn't lose a game at the U14 division. His home team in NCAFA is the Raiders. He is electric as a quarterback. He at his age, he's probably the best quarterback at the Bantam age group in the entire city and the entire region. So that's where I feel the most confident about it, because if you have that guy at signal caller who's one of the most talented guys in the whole league, I mean, you got a real good shot.
Yeah, and son of Chris Colson, a longtime offensive coordinator, coach for Ottawa U, Carleton. He knows his stuff, and he's imparting that knowledge into his son probably since he's been watching football. As a newborn on Chris's lap. So yes, this is definitely something. I think, as you said, that Raiders field. I always remember that field, whether it was going out and watching the games or playing in them when I was a kid. It's windy when it's grass. When it gets cold, it is a tough place to play in Raiders country there in South Gloucester. So can we keep this kid healthy? And also, does it limit it as the weather turns? Is that passing attack going to be as significant for Colson with that Raiders team? I don't know what the run game looks like. So these are all question marks, but this is what makes it
fun, guys, and I can't wait to watch this game this Friday. Probably the most anticipated game for me on the whole schedule is the Mustangs versus the Raiders. Just absolutely, or Mustangs versus the Riders. I absolutely cannot wait for this one. But switching gears, let's move over to the Pee Wee division, because we had two really highly anticipated matchups at the Pee Wee division this past weekend, which was obviously the 4-0 Cumberland Panthers battling the 4-0 Nepean Eagles. We have some coverage of that game coming later on. Obviously not the game we were expecting. Cumberland kind of dominated that one from the jump. 35-0 is the final score. Cumberland moves to 5-0. Nepean gets their first loss on the season. I tell you what, guys, this U14 Cumberland culture and just the way they're able to just dominate year in, year out, it's just a sight to see. Like I thought coming into this game it would be very close. It could go either way. But I was talking to some of the other head coaches in the league at U14, and they said, watch out for Cumberland. Like they're really starting to find their gear. Jesse, going to you as a former coach of Cumberland, what makes the culture special there, especially at this Pee Wee age group where they've won back-to-back provincial championships in the OSFL, and obviously in the NCAFA they're always right there at Pee Wee?
Well, I mean, it's the same whether you're talking, pro sports or youth sports. I think it starts at the top. the president, Mike Schmidt, takes this very seriously. Him and his wife devote a lot of time to this to give the players the best possible experience. And really, when you take it to that level, and there's no reason. Like, I've heard coaches in NCAFA say it's just this, it's just community ball. It's and that attitude, like, I don't necessarily agree with it. I think you spend a ton of time volunteering and being a part of the league. Why not make it as good as it can be? I think in terms of what motivates young people to play the sport these days, like, we're living in 2024. It's it is social media, it's the jerseys, it's a little bit of the culture. And if at the top you can find your mark of finding a vibe where the kids respond to it and they want to come to practice and they want to be friends with their other teammates and wear the apparel, and show up on the games and then take care of business, that can be a powerful thing, and it just rolls year after year. And the fact that the Cumberland also has the summer league, so they really are 12 months a year working on this program. It's hard to catch up if you're not doing that. And I think the results in the standings show it. But playing there was great. Coaching there was great. I was asked to coach back in 2017, the first time that the OFFL, the Ontario Varsity Football League, had finally kind of imploded due to, in my opinion, just like kind of neglect, like just basically having people dial in the same thing every year, not innovating, not really investing in the league. That eventually came to an end. The group created the Ontario Provincial Football League, the OPFL, and I was asked by Jeff Karate, NCAFA Hall of Famer coach, to join his squad as a defensive back coach. And right away I show up. The practices are there. I have basically the playbook and a PDF form. We have game film. We have huddle. We have a golf shirt waiting for me. Like, everyone looks the same on the sideline. That's the kind of operation they're running. And I see it at some other clubs that do it that way. But I mean, what more fun to play on a team that's run that way? I remember there was the same thing when I played the OVFL for Myers. I show up and it just felt like I was entering a pro training camp. It really did. And when I think back on that, like, I can't remember what year I was playing, but the OVFL was the first year Myers had a team in the OVFL, and it was Delahunty was our head coach. We had literally like 25 coaches. We had like two assistants for every position. They were ex-CIS football players. It was run that way, and I loved it. Like, I know some people might say it's too competitive and it's a turnoff, but like, I think a true football player wants to walk into that environment and thrives on it. That's what Cumberland has going right now, and it's due to the Schmidts and their support staff. The other thing I'll say about building a program like that in football at the youth level is you need a lot of people, right? If you're going in trying to just run it as like a president and like a solo thing, like it can only be so good. You really, as a president, I think the main job is go out and recruit like crazy to get a volunteer team, a good board, so that you can then divide the labor up and no one is too overwhelmed with too many tasks. And that's what they've been able to do really well.
Yeah, we've said it a bunch of times before, but it takes a village, right? And I think they're living proof of that. They do a great job, and everyone just loves like playing for them. And you can see the pride that they have in throwing on that blue and white jersey. As much as it pains me to say, they have a lot of pride, and they do it the right way.
Well, and I was just add there, like, so that people are watching this, they're going to criticize us for being in love with the Cumberland Panthers. I'm just saying that, like, there are other coaches I've talked to, other levels too, that say they respect it. They respect it. And it's kind of nice having this adversary in the league that's kind of a superpower. It sets the standard, and then it gives your team something to go after, right? You talked about Cumberland Cornwall, like at the early days, like working up to the point where you're in games with Myers and Cumberland and the Raiders. So that's the kind of thing I think at Bantam and Pee Wee we want to get to as a league, where year in, year out, there's parity. And I think the only way to do that is to take a page out of Cumberland.
Yeah, and I think even before Cumberland, Cumberland wasn't dominant right away. They were living under Myers' shadows for a really long time, being that second tier organization where Myers is winning all these provincial championships and these NCAFA championships. And, so for them to build up to that level, it takes a certain thing. But yeah, if anybody, is thinking we're, looking at Cumberland a little too closely. Like, just remember, Jesse played for Bell and I played for the Wildcats. I mean, I would have loved nothing more than to take down Cumberland every week and make sure that they're, not at this level. But I think it's an interesting dynamic to chat about. But anyways, the other Pee Wee games I wanted to mention, obviously Cumberland takes that number one spot now emphatically, taking care in a P and 35-0. But that Orleans Bell game, Jesse, that you were at, was also one of the Ontario games of the week. Both teams 3-1 coming into that game, and it was a slugfest. A lot of points in that game. What did you see out of that game, and who were some of the key players that you've seen that made an impact?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of went the way of the U14 Cumberland Nepean game. Like you said, both 3-0. Quite frankly, Bell Warriors dominated that game from the opening kickoff. What I saw was a pretty great running attack, two kind of threats, good O-line, well-disciplined team. We talked a lot about Cumberland being well-organized. Bell has a lot of that too. You can see it on the sideline. They run a tight ship. They've got some core values that the Warriors have had, and those have been passed on and prioritized over president after president after president. And the squads that they're able to put together, sometimes the talent changes year to year on those teams, but like the discipline's always right there. They had a quarterback and runner, Gabriel Rose, who I interviewed after the game. Number 18, big body, asked to do a lot. He's their main like threat. He can pound the rock. He's a playoff player. When we talk about going in to see the Raiders in late October, that's the kind of kid that's going to get 30, 40 carries for this Bell team. But they did a really great job. I will give a lot of credit to the Orleans Bengals, well coached by, of course, Natari, who's a longtime coach in the city for Myers and other teams. He's gone down to the U14. It's great to see him giving back to those younger kids, and what a great role model to have on the sideline leading that squad. But I just think that U14 Bell team was just much stronger, and we saw the disparity there. I think also offensively, Orleans might have just had a bad night too. I think it was the passes were just kind of just a little too far, a little out of reach. So maybe it's not so lopsided if they play 10 out of 10 times. I don't know if it goes that way 10 times, but yeah, it was really great to see. The other runner that really caught my eyes for the Bell Warriors was I have his name here. Jatavian Hall, number 4, much different type of runner, very smooth, looks like Jamar Chase, really. Like he was really great, and they got him the ball quite a bit, and once he saw some daylight, he was gone. No one was going to catch him. So I think, and somebody correct me if they're watching this, I think the Hall, he might be the younger brother of another Hall player that played for the Raiders and went on to, I believe it was Carleton University to play his ball. But that name seems familiar, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're related. And this is the Mateo Hall's younger brother. So yeah, just great. But it'll be fun to see the Warriors team. I think they're still in the running now, right? Like they're right up there at that U14 level. If you look at what's happening in the rest of the province, I don't know if you want to go there right now, but yeah. Scarborough seems to be this team that even the Stamps were saying are the team to beat. So I'm looking at Scarborough on those power rankings, and they're
right. Yeah. Well, before we jump to the OFFL, because we will be going to the OFFL a little bit more in depthly here, I just want to shout out. Obviously, we said Myers versus who's Myers playing at Bantam again? It just passed me.
South Ottawa.
The Mustangs and Myers is going to be a huge game to watch at Bantam this week. But two big-time Pee Wee matchups. Once again, we had it last week. Neither of them really panned out the way we wanted it to. But this week we have the aforementioned Bell Warriors, who Jesse just broke down, and they got a lot of tough runners. They will be battling Cumberland at home this week on Saturday. So Bell sitting at 4-1, Cumberland sitting at 5-0. Does Bell just need to get those aforementioned playmakers, the ball as many times as they can, Jess? What do you like the plan of attack there?
Well, I think the focus has to be on defense, and I know the defensive coordinator very well at that team. Sorry, he's at Bantam. Correct myself. But yeah, no, I think the coaching staff at U14 have done a very good job, but the defense is going to be something that needs to be worked on all week. they are watching film. I don't know if you saw it, but I caught it. The Bell Warriors have posted that they've renovated their trailer that they have. It's a trailer on their practice field that they've had. They've used it mostly for storage over the years. They put some TLC into that thing. They painted it the Warriors colors. They painted their benches, and they've got a film room set up there. That's what it takes to take on kind of this undefeated Cumberland team. So I think they're going to have their hands full, but it looks like they're up to the challenge. We heard Gabriel Rose talk about it in his interview. Like, they've had that one circled on their calendar all year. It's not lost on them that, like, that is going to be the test. That is the season right here. So that's a great game to catch, and look forward to seeing the result there.
And then another one before we wrap up the CAFA for the week, Bel Air taking on Canada at U14, the only other undefeated team at Pee Wee other than Cumberland is Canada. They're going to Notre Dame High School to battle the Bel Air Lions, who are 4-1. Their only loss coming to Cumberland, which was actually a pretty close game. And one thing about this Bel Air team, keep an eye and remember number 13, Joni and Gandhi for the Bel Air Lions, because you're going to be saying his name a lot. We had an interview that came out right before his Player of the Week performance against the Wildcats, my dear Wildcats. He put up about 300 all-purpose yards on them, but really excited to see that game. Obviously, Jesse, Bel Air last season at the Fall Cup, really great for them. They played in that slobber knocker U14
Amazing.
Tier 2 game against Niagara that I think came down to the last play. I think the score was like 34 to like 28, and teams were just going back and forth. That was the game of the Fall Cup.
That was.
No,
I was going to say that was the best game.
That was the best game of the Fall Cup, not even close. And you know, a really cool idea of the Fall Cup, because you see these teams like Bel Air. Like Bel Air, that was the Tier 2 championship, meaning they won the B Cup. They got to go play that game, and thank God they did, because I mean that was an amazing game. So this U14 Bel Air culture, I think you can really watch out for that, because this number 13, Joanie and Gandhi, is electric. So watch out for Bel Air this weekend. They might be on upset alert. They might upset Canada, especially playing on home turf at Notre Dame. Really excited for these Pee Wee matchups, guys. And obviously we mentioned the Bantam game at the top. What a weekend for football in NCAFA overall. I mean,
yeah, don't sleep on these Lions. The one thing I've learned watching this league and playing in it, being a part of this league for so long, the Lions have the capability always of surprising you. There's a culture there too, where when you've come up through the Bel Air Lions, like they call it like Lion for life.
Underdog mentality, I'd say.
Yeah, underdog mentality. They don't always have the nicest jerseys. They play out of Notre Dame High School, but you know, they have athletes, and they can, when it comes down to it, like, the parents show up, they wave flags, they get into it, and these teams can kind of upset you at the end of the season. So yeah, I would definitely not sleep on these Lions U14.
One thing I will say, Russell, this is for you too, and for all the OGs out there. If you want to go check out a really nice, a really awesome old game from the vault in the CAFA, go watch the A-Cup Bantam game between Bel Air versus Rideau, the Rideau Red Blacks back when they were in the league. That was Bel Air's mountaintop time when they had some of those really talented players. And what was the head coach's name back then, Jesse? Matty Chartier.
Yeah. And the year before they won, that was the second year they won at Bantam against Rideau. The year before, that was their first A-Cup championship with that kind of squad. And also, like, Simikinda, great running back that played on that team. That first game, the year before they played Rideau, he stepped in as quarterback halfway through the game. He was a running back. It wasn't working. The quarterback, things just weren't like jiving. He stepped in and pulled off like a squeaker to get through and win that A-Cup. That's an amazing game. I think Matty Chartier cried at the end of it, so check it out.
Yeah, I just want to throw a shout out there. There's so many good games we have in the vault on TYSN's YouTube channel. So if you find yourself scrolling, there are some slobber knockers there that I go back and watch all the time. That's probably one of my favorites, so go check that out. But switching gears, guys, let's talk. Before we move to the OFFL, quickly I wanted to mention, I seen the OSFL All-Stars came out. What a summer it was. Obviously, we spent a lot of time covering that. Russell, we're going to get you in on the OSFL next year. Don't worry about it. You're going to love that. That's, every territory in Ontario plays in that. But I wanted to give a quick shout out to all the OSFL All-Stars, especially the ones that we have here in the 613 and Cornwall. What a season it was for the OSFL. one of the things I wanted to shout out was the London Junior Mustangs once again at U18, and you've seen how much talent they had on this all-star list. But I also like going through and seeing, some of these other teams that didn't get the shine that maybe other some of these higher teams would, but they still have all-stars there, and it's great to see a lot of these organizations throughout Ontario get recognized. Jesse, what were some of your cool takeaways, like seeing that? I mean, just a great initiative by the OSFL to do this at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, like you almost you have a short memory because there's just so much football, and the summer season ends. You're watching these games, and then the fall starts, and you kind of forget it. So it's nice to see the players and just remind you, like, oh my God, that kid was amazing this season. It was fun watching his highlights. A lot of recognition coming out of Ottawa. I think the NCAFA will probably do the same thing with the All Stars, and we're going to start to see some of those teams, like I mentioned, the talent on both sides of the ball, like whether it's Kempville or whether it's Orleans. There are players, there are ballers on those teams, even if they're not winning games. So All-Star is always a great time to kind of bring those kids to light and give them the shine that they deserve because they're amazing players.
Yeah, and I wanted to shout out some of the OSFL All-Stars that you can see in NCAFA week in and week out. So you got Andrew Colson, who I mentioned at the top, who's quarterbacking that undefeated Bantam Raiders team. You have the Cornwall All-Stars on the Cumberland U14 team, which you got Connor Hamlin, Bryce Camplin, all those guys, and then a few others that still play for that Cumberland team. And then you had some Myers All-Stars in there, like Shane Brown, who I believe plays on the Canada Knights varsity team. So I really like how, you see these teams on their OSFL teams, and then they come back to their home club, right? And that's where they're actually made a name for themselves, and they actually got to play. I really like that parody of them playing for one of these provincial teams, coming back, and you see them in a Raiders or in a Knights uniform. I always love seeing that. So, watch out for these OSFL All-Stars. Make sure you go check out who was nominated as an OSFL All-Star, and watch out for them at your NCAFA games every weekend, because it's going to be great to see all that action. Okay, so Russell, I mean, you look at this Bantam division like even more closely, right? As an outsider looking in, I really like how, not only do you have kind of the six-headed monster, as we mentioned at the top, with the Wildcats, Knights, Mustangs, Riders, Raiders, and Panthers, but for a lot of the people that do know, these are some of the most storied programs throughout NCAFA. Like, a lot of these teams have experience winning A Cups and being in huge championship games. Like I mentioned, whenever I would play, these were six of the hardest teams to play against. Like the Mustangs had Neville Gallimore, who's in the NFL right now. Myers was always dominant. Cumberland was always dominant. The Raiders had so much talent on defense, and the Wildcats, like when we were playing in those Bantam games, I swear would have 4 to 5 injuries every game just because of how hard this team hit. So seeing these 6 teams kind of lead the way is awesome. And one thing I wanted to mention also, Russell, was last year the A Cup championship was Cumberland versus Nepean. Nepean was undefeated all year, and Cumberland was able to take them down at the end there. But what we're going to get this year in the A Cup is there's not going to be a Nepean. Nepean's not going to play in that A Cup, so it's going to be a new matchup than we've had in the last 3 years. It's going to be, one of these top 6 teams against another one. So I'm kind of looking forward to having a different matchup at the end of the season in the A Cup.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting. It's weird when we talk about a Nepean Eagles team that was undefeated and lost in the championship. And we're probably looking like, they're going to come back this year. They're going to be better. They've taken that loss. Even look like in NHL, they look at the Florida Panthers. They lost the Stanley Cup the first year against Vegas, came back the next year, and then they won. So maybe we'd look at it like something like that. But now they're at the bottom of the standings, right? But they have a bit of a younger team, to my understanding. So that plays a factor in it too. You probably lost a lot of those experienced, grizzled guys that probably were a big part of your team. But yeah, I know you've asked me, but what do you think your matchup is for the A Cup final is going to be, Devin?
That's a really awesome question. I don't really think, like, a lot of the years, Russell, there's probably like 2 clear-cut teams that are going to be like, hey, it's just a matter of time until these 2 teams play in the A Cup if they've already played again, right? Like if they're going to match up again, and let's see what happens. This season, man, I mean, you look at it, there's 3 undefeated teams still. Yep. And also the South Ottawa Mustangs lost by 2 to one of the undefeated teams. And you're having Canada and Cornwall play against Myers in these one-score games, sometimes overtime games, against the undefeated Myers Riders, who have the most wins in the league. So it's very interesting. if I had to pick two teams, give me the Raiders, because I think their quarterback play is going to propel them at the end of the season. Having that guy that can really lead your offense is invaluable whenever you get to the playoffs. And then, man, it's hard to go against Cumberland. I mean, they've been there the last 3 years at that A-Cup level. It's just about if they can win it again, I think. So give me the Raiders against Cumberland.
And the Raiders winning?
Give me the Raiders. Yeah, give me the Raiders. Give me the Raiders, yeah.
I got another question for you. You mentioned a lot about the Raiders' great quarterback play and how it's a big part of their team. Do you think as the season goes on and we get to a couple more cold weather games, especially when you're in the playoffs and they do end up going a deep run, do you think maybe relying too much on their quarterback play is going to actually cripple them in the long run due to the cold weather and high winds? You never know, right? Like you get a really bad cold weather game.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? We've seen at some of those NCAFA championship weekends at the Sportsplex, we've seen it all. We've seen the weather's 18 and sunny somehow in November, and they get to play in that element. We've also seen -5 and it's a snowstorm. So you're right, it is unpredictable to play in those elements. So we'll have to see what they kind of get involved, but. With the Raiders, they have a lot of talented skill players as well. I just think having that quarterback that can maybe even have a strong enough arm to cut through those elements where it's like the snow's coming down and they could still keep that passing game involved, where some teams have to eliminate it completely, right? And be like, we have to leave the pass completely. The elements are too much. The wind's gusting too much. I think the Raiders can kind of go through that and be like, hey, we can still throw the ball here.
Wow. Okay, nice. We've talked a lot about the A Cup. What about B Cup? We mentioned a little bit today, the Knights and the Wildcats. But outside of those two teams, what other teams do you think can contend going to a B Cup final and B Cup playoffs? Like how many teams make the B Cup? Is it like top 4 and then the next 4, or how does it work?
Yeah. So I believe I always get confused on how the A Cups and B Cups work, but I want to say 4 teams make the A Cup bracket, and they play in a semifinals game against each other, and whoever wins that game, makes it to the A Cup final. And then the B Cup separated into their own bracket, and then the C Cup is separated into their own bracket. So yeah, let's jump into it a little bit here. Like the B Cup and C Cup are still awesome, things to win. Like I remember playing in a C Cup game at the Sportsplex against the Eagles when I was younger. And, to me, it was like my Super Bowl. So, like, even for the teams that make it to the C Cup, I mean, that's still a great honor to win that game. But, yeah, like I mentioned at the top, B Cup, I'm looking Wildcats and Canada, because right now, if you're looking at the standings, it looks like the top 4 might already kind of be set in stone. We'll see. There's some shifting that can happen, but Canada and Cornwall at that B Cup level, and then a sleeper would be the Bell Warriors, who have had the toughest schedule throughout the first 5 weeks, no doubt about it. They've played every top team in the league. They finally got their first win last week, but they're definitely a team that can sneak into that B Cup conversation. They can win some of these close games and definitely be in the conversation. And then you look at the C Cup, Russell, we look at, at the bottom of these standings, you got, let's kind of up right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams that have 1 or less wins. And I think that the C Cup could be a really competitive game as well. Like you look at Bel Air, Orleans, Kemptville, Nepean, North Gloucester. Those are all really close knitted teams as far as their wins and losses go, but also like their points for and points against. So, the talent might not necessarily be there on the full team, but there definitely have some go-to players that, can make the C Cup really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about like C Cup teams would probably be, getting ragdolled all season, but now they're probably a little more content to actually, be competitive. These are gonna be probably some competitive games. These teams are tired of losing. They want to win something. So I think that probably could be, outside of probably the A Cup, the most competitive, because these teams want to win. They're tired of losing.
Yeah, and what do they always say? They always say hungry dogs run faster.
Yeah.
Like, you're tired of going in and week out and losing these games, and then at the end of the season you let it all out, right? And you and these teams too, watch out for them at the end of the season. Watch out for them at the end of the season playing spoiler, because they have absolutely nothing to lose. So when they're playing, let's say, a Myers team, or a Cornwall team, or a Canada team, or a Bell team, they're going to throw the whole kitchen sink at you, right? They're going to watch out for the trick plays, watch out for the onside kicks, fake punts, reverses. they don't care, right? They got nothing to lose at this point of the season, so they're going to throw everything at you. And if they can knock you down, like, that makes your whole season. Like, I remember playing when I was younger, and we had some upset weeks where the team coming in did not expect to lose to us, but we were just throwing everything at them, you know, going deep into the playbook, switching our offensive strategy or defensive strategy, just because we're throwing everything at you. So I would keep an eye on some of those matchups later in the season for some of those desperate teams and maybe some of those top teams that have a lot more to lose.
And if you had to pick a champion for the B Cup and the C Cup, who would you pick?
Yeah, so I for B Cup, give me the Wildcats. I know there's some hometown love there, but I think their younger group of players at the Bantam division start to, you know, pick it up a little bit more, and these close games against a team like Myers this past weekend, that really does help your team and it builds you up. Obviously, it's a bit of a homer pick. I mean, it can go either way. I think it's going to be Canada and Cornwall in that B Cup final. You know, take your pick. Two really good organizations, and then at the C Cup level, if Bell stays there, if Bell stays at that range where they get, you know, 1 to 2 to 3 wins on the season. That puts them in the C Cup territory. I want to believe it would keep. So if Bell is in that C Cup territory, there's not a doubt in my mind that they win that game. But if they move up to that B category, I really like Kemptville, man. I think Kemptville, their second year in the league, I think it would be really cool for them to win a C Cup at Bantam, especially because this is their first year fielding a Bantam team, which is really cool. So I'm pulling for Kemptville. I'm pulling for Cornwall, obviously. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting end of the season at this division, like always. Yeah. And such good football.
I can agree with you more.
TYSN would like to thank Football Ontario for its support of the TouchDown Ontario program.